Chris Brown has been a successful artist since he was 15 years old. But despite the fame and success, he seemed to really want to embrace gang culture. In fact, he's drawn himself to gangs in the opposite way that most other artists have. Chris Brown grew up in Tappahannock, Virginia, which is a place described as having a above average crime rate, but Chris Brown was never really introduced to gangs and gang culture. In fact, he was successful at the age where he may have been lured into joining a gang. At 13, Chris Brown was discovered by Hit Mission Records, and by the age of 15, he moved to New York to chase after his dreams. Even at this time, Chris Brown was phenomenally gifted, and a lot of people were seeing him as the next Michael Jackson, primarily due to the fact that he was equally good at singing and dancing. Chris Brown was also huge into hip-hop culture, but his label persuaded him against rapping and wanted to position him exclusively as an R&B singer. Not only was he advised against rapping, he was also given a squeaky clean image and had to somewhat abandon his affinity for hip-hop. As his success continued to grow, pretty much everyone watching this video knows what happened next. The photo of Rihanna that confirmed the story that Chris Brown had assaulted her, and this almost ended his career before it properly took off. But with bad optics like that, how can it get worse? Despite this arguably unforgivable behavior to some, Chris Brown was forgiven career-wise. And most importantly of all, he was forgiven by Rihanna. It was a case that both of these two young and gifted artists would go their separate ways and fulfill their potential. 2 years after the incident, Chris Brown released a new album, Fame, and, to Chris Brown's relief, this was a big success. However, there was no real point in trying to promote the same squeaky clean image, and Chris Brown was allowed to embrace hip-hop and rap more. With all that had happened, you would think that Chris Brown would stay on the straight and narrow from here on in. But curiously, this wasn't the case. This could be because maybe Chris Brown had anger issues or he had become a target of his behavior around Rihanna. Whatever the case may be, a series of brawls occurred that involved both Chris Brown and his entourage. In 2012, a fight occurred between Chris Brown and Drake at the Greenhouse Club in New York, which escalated into a brawl between the entourages of both artists. It's unclear what the feud was about, but many drew the likely conclusion it was about Rihanna or some other female, given that Drake was seeing her at the time. You could excuse this as a one-off, but a similar incident occurred in February of 2013. At an LA recording studio, Frank Ocean apparently informed Chris Brown that he had taken his designated parking space. Chris Brown offered to shake Frank Ocean's hand, but Frank Ocean refused. A fight escalated, and again, Chris Brown's entourage got into a fight with Frank Ocean, who was with Odd Future at the time. Later that month, Chris Brown was threatened at a Hollywood nightclub by a self-proclaimed member of the Crips. This person shouted several expletives at him and asked the not-so-innocent question of whether his Lamborghini was bulletproof. Most importantly, the person on the other side of the argument wasn't Frank Ocean or Drake this time. It was a full-fledged gang member. So for obvious reasons, Chris Brown didn't choose to escalate the situation, especially since he was in his city. And speaking about the incident, he told TMZ, "It's LA, brother. You just gotta keep your head down and keep walking." In June of that year, Chris Brown released a video for his song Don't Think They Know, which contained a direct message to end gang violence. The video begins with the message, "Every 2 hours in America today, a child dies of a gunshot wound. And unity is what we're afraid of, so fear is insanity. Let's love each other." This video is in black and white, with red and blue colors interspersed throughout to represent the Crips and the Bloods. Speaking about the song, he said, "When I did the video, I wanted to do kind of like the Boys in the Hood theme. Also bringing an aspect of the side of the world that people never really talk about anymore. Gun violence or stuff that we deal with in our neighborhood or community that we could just stop." This was obviously a greatly appreciated gesture from someone with Chris Brown's sizable audience and influence. But a few months later, he did something that definitely undermined his message. In August of 2013, Chris Brown was in Hawaii and decided to spray some graffiti. He spray painted the phrase Fruits Piru, which is in reference to the Fruittown Piru gang, a gang affiliated or part of the Bloods. In the following year at the BET Awards, he once again seemed to demonstrate support for the Bloods. At an after party, he could be seen using hand signs used for the gang. Chris Brown was heavily criticized for doing this, and as I mentioned at the start, his decision to embrace gangs came at a peculiar time in his life. Typically, rappers make gang signs because these gangs represent the neighborhood they came out of and were part of their struggle to get to where they are today. In Chris Brown's case, he grew up in Virginia and decided to embrace these gangs in his mid-20s when he was already successful and had just got done cleaning up his image after the Rihanna incident. In an interview with Vlad TV, the rapper and member of the Crips, Trey D, was baffled by Chris Brown and others joining gangs after their success. He said, "It has to either be psychological defect to where you don't want to enjoy your life and enjoy your wealth and, ride around on boats." He also said, "I see it as like the peer pressure aspect is that is this what you really want for yourself, or do you feel that this is the only way you'll be secure in certain areas? So are you buying into it for protection, or that's the only logical conclusion that I can come to?" The gang signs led people to the conclusion that Chris Brown must have joined the Bloods. You can't just use those signs in public. At the very least, it would be unwise to do so, and there would be some pushback on it. A member of the Bloods responded that Chris Brown is not a member, but they do not have a problem with him letting these signs rock. This gang member had clearly thought this through and gave 4 specific points as to why Chris Brown was allowed to make these gang signs. He said, he's hired several of them to work for him, giving their Compton community an economic boost. Chris came to the hood and hangs out with them. He shot a music video in the neighborhood and even included some of them in the video, and he donated 1,000 pairs and used shoes to Compton kids. Although it's easy to hate on Chris Brown, he seems to at least care about these people living in poorer neighborhoods in LA, which can't be said for a lot of other celebrities that live there. But does that mean you need to rep the gang as well? Chris Brown using the Bloods as protection is an interesting theory. While at first this makes some sense, Charlemagne has said that artists who do this are being extorted. In an interview with Vlad TV, he said, "You're really paying for protection when you can just pay for protection the legal way. Why put yourself in the mix of that?" In this interview, we sort of get down into the root of why Chris Brown is so obsessed with gangs. Interestingly, Chris Brown is not the only person who's seemingly done this, and the same criticism has been levied at rapper Bow Wow. Chris Brown was born in 1989, and Bow Wow was born in 1987. So their earliest memories of hip-hop would have been during the golden age of hip-hop and the height of gangster rap. According to Vlad, they grew up on Death Row and Snoop and the Dog Pound, and has sort of been enamored with that gang culture because of the music. Charlemagne says that if this is the case, then it's an incredibly naive viewpoint. He said, "Salute to all the real Bloods and all the real Crips out there who probably had no other choice because it was a thing in that community or was a thing in their family. But these guys who have totally other options, who didn't grow up around that at all, your entertainers, Bow Wow's the Chris Browns. Stop it." In September 2014, Chris Brown was interviewed by Sway where he was questioned about potential gang affiliations. Chris Brown simply says that the people he runs into in California just happen to be in gangs, and there's not much else to it. He said, "When you're in LA and you're around people, you meet everybody. You meet Crips, you meet Bloods, especially in this industry that I'm in. I'm not in the country world. I'm not in the all-the-way pop world. When you're in hip-hop, all of that meshes." 2 years later, in 2016, Chris Brown came out with a rather strange rant on Instagram. He was complaining about people pretending that they're a part of gangs, the very thing he had been criticized for several times. In a now deleted post, he wrote, "So many fake gang members these days. They get in the industry and the next thing you know, they got a blue rag or a red rag. Ain't been through nothing. Out of town dudes kill me with this stuff. You not a Blood or Crip just because you know a dude from that hood and you bought a blue or red rag from the dollar store. Stop faking the funk. Y'all not about that. Blue Bloods and Red Crips is what I'ma call you imposters." With all this drama and controversy surrounding Chris Brown, it's very rare that people actually touch upon his music. Chris Brown has undoubtedly had a successful career, but he's probably not hit the astronomical heights envisioned for him when he was just 15 years old. He hasn't become the next Michael Jackson. And there are no Chris Brown albums that are comparable to Thriller or Off the Wall. There's obviously no shame in not hitting the musical heights of Michael Jackson, but his fellow artist, Akon, firmly believes that he had that potential. In fact, Akon even argues that Chris Brown's obsession with gangs was what held him back. In an interview in 2022, Akon said, "In this day and age, the only person, in my opinion, that could have achieved just as great of a legacy as Michael Jackson would have been Chris Brown. I just believe that Chris Brown wasn't surrounded by the circle of creative people that Mike was surrounded by. Because Chris got the talent. He just needed the direction. So imagine if Chris had Mike's team. Just imagine that. But Chris, he got bloods around him. He got little gangbangers around him. He don't have the guidance. He's smart, but he's smart in what this generation attracts. Even Chris Brown fans will agree that he didn't reach his potential. Some Chris Brown stans will say it was because of the Rihanna incident, which there is an element of that could be argued. It could also be argued that it strongly helped propel her career. But there is no way you're becoming the next Michael Jackson when you're strongly gang affiliated and throwing up gang signs and repping it.